Everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the Connected Virtual Tech Event. We have a terrific panel for you today. Our title is CBRS, the Future of Private Networks that You Can Own. We've got a wonderful panel of esteemed industry players. And I would like to say before we start, a couple of things, just housekeeping wise. Please, we bring you this event for attendees as a free event. Please support our exhibitors and our sponsors and visit their booths virtually. They are the ones that are giving us the ability to do this today. And we want to thank them and all of the sponsors of this event. So while we get started now, I want to introduce our panel today. We have Todd Landry from JMA, we have Andy Clegg from Google, Ron Mao from Baicells, Bob Gessel from Ericsson, and Brenda Delaney from A&S. And so the other thing I'd like to mention that on our panel this morning called A View from the Top, which is a group of very industry savvy, esteemed commercial real estate owners and managers. John Gilbert from Rudin Management, probably one of the most prominent people in the industry, made a huge deal out of the fact that he thought CBRS might be the answer for him in his buildings to tie them together, and with what's going on with the virus when they return, that he needs to be able to use this network to be able to carry all of the information that's important for him in his lobby and getting people into the building. So it was a huge plug for CBRS. So without further ado, we're going to start with Andy Clegg from Google in just talking about the background of CBRS, how it works, so we give everybody a little context, and then we're going to talk about use cases, monetizations, and all those sorts of things as part of this. So without further ado, Andy, would you, Peter, go to the next slide, and let's let Andy start. Andy, the floor is yours.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Rich. Can you hear me okay?
Hear you fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yep. Sorry, I had to have a last-minute change of venue here, so welcome to my guest bedroom. But anyway, it's a goodest place as any to do a webinar from. So we thought we'd start out with sort of a very high-level overview of CBRS and how it works. Some of you may be familiar already, but for some of you, this may be relatively new. So I thought we'd give a bit of an introduction to what makes this band a little bit different. First of all, CBRS is obviously Citizens Broadband Radio Service. And it is CBRS is shared mid-band spectrum. So what that means in practice is that CBRS is not the only service using this band. And in fact, before CBRS came to this band, it was already being used by others. And so we're using it on a shared basis, and CBRS has to go out of its way to not interfere with the incumbents who are already in the band. So the incumbents, the principal incumbent in the band was the Department of Defense, but there's also some fixed satellite service earth stations in the band and some legacy broadband systems that will be moving out. So within CBRS itself, there's actually two tiers of service. There's the priority access license, which is a license you actually purchase at auction from the FCC, and I'll talk about that shortly. And then there's a sort of an unlicensed-like layer to CBRS called General Authorized Access. Technically, it's licensed, but it's a lot like unlicensed. You don't have to go and buy a license from the FCC. You don't have to get permission to get a license. So it's a lot like the typical unlicensed use systems you're more familiar with. However, what makes this whole band work is the CBRS devices, before they're allowed to transmit, have to get authorizations from a centralized database system called a Spectrum Access System, or a SAS. And the reason they have to do that is that the SAS makes sure that your CBRS device isn't going to interfere with any of the incumbents like the DoD or the satellite systems. And it also manages interference into the priority access license layer. So by virtue of paying for your PAL license, you get a little bit of interference protections from the other CBRS services. So all of this is centrally managed by a Spectrum Access System, or a SAS. And CBRS devices, or professional installer of CBRS devices, connects to a SAS provide the information about the device, like its location and power and antenna height and things like that. And the SAS then looks at all of that and determines what frequencies in the CBRS band are available for use by that device. And ideally, that whole process is transparent to the typical user. Either the device connects automatically and gets permission, or the professional installer does it on behalf of the user. But ideally, that whole process is transparent to the CBRS user. So SAS is the sort of magic that makes the whole CBRS band work. We can go on to the next slide, which is really just a high-level overview of what I just described. The Spectrum Access System is this cloud-based thing that sits in the middle, and your Citizens Broadband Radio Service Device, or CBSD, is the little white box there to the lower left of the Spectrum Access System. And before it's allowed to transmit, it queries the Spectrum Access System. The Spectrum Access System checks FCC databases and also checks on incumbent activities such as the DoD radar systems. And if everything is clear, it talks back to the CBSD and says, okay, you're all clear to transmit. And then that CBSD from that point forward is allowed to transmit to other CBSDs or to end user devices like handsets. And then the CBSD checks back in with the SAS every once in a while to make sure it's okay to continue to transmit. So that's a very high level overview of how it works. And again, this whole process is typically transparent to the CBRS user. So the next slide, please. So, what's CBRS used for? And instead of, prior to this point, we often saw people talking with slides about what CBRS could be used for, or their vision of what CBRS could be used for. What I've put up on this slide is what I know CBRS is being used for. So this isn't theoretical, but it's things that either during initial commercial deployments or now that we've reached full commercial deployment status, that CBRS is actually being used for. And I have visibility into this both as a Spectrum Access System administrator. Google is one of the Spectrum Access Systems, but also my involvement in the various industry associations that deal with CBRS. So these are actual use cases that are deployed that we're aware of. So a lot of indoor applications, entertainment venues, very popular there, hotels and airports, shopping malls, enterprise networks for a virtual or a private LTE network within a building or around a campus. Data centers, it's used as an alternative to DAS. Outdoor sports has been a big player in CBRS. The NFL, there was involvement of CBRS in the Super Bowl earlier this year. Major League Baseball is outfitting stadiums. NASCAR, Google has done a demo with NASCAR streaming live video from cars using CBRS. The PGA Tour has been using it to backhaul ShotLink data from the course back to their ShotLink trailer. It's very heavily used for rural broadband. Legacy broadband providers are switching to CBRS. We've got mines using it. Cable TV systems doing that last 100 meters or last 200 meters have been experimenting with CBRS. And then indoor and outdoor uses combined. We've seen corporate campuses, college campuses, obviously the big mobile network operators and the cable companies operating as MVNOs have all been using or are using CBRS for those applications. So these are just some of the ones I'm aware of. There's a lot more out there. In fact, you all probably have things that I'm not aware of. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there are some key CBRS timelines you need to be aware of. First of all, commercial service in the lower tier, the GAA tier, is available right now. You can go to a SAS and you can get service right now. But the FCC has scheduled the PAL auction to buy a priority access license at auction to begin on July 23rd of this year. It's FCC auction number 105. Up to 7 10 megahertz PALs will be auctioned in each of a little over 3,200 counties around the country. So there's over 22,000 PAL licenses that'll be up for bid. 10 days from today, or 11 days, I guess, from today is the deadline to apply to participate in that auction. You have to fill out an FCC Form 175. The auction will start on the 23rd. The reserve price right now is 2 cents per megahertz pop. So 20 cents times the population of the county is the minimum bid. And the minimum they've set is 1,000. It goes up from there. For example, Los Angeles County, because it has such a huge population, I think the minimum bid for Los Angeles County is up at $2 million, somewhere around there. We think that by the time the auction has been conducted, and all of the administrative things have passed, and the licenses are actually issued and in the hands of the winners, and they're ready to start operating as PAL, we think that whole process will take a few months to play out. So we're looking at sometime in fourth quarter of 2020 for PAL operations to actually begin. That's an estimate, but that's probably a fairly reasonable estimate. If you're going to participate in the auction, you really do need to understand the encumbrances and the incumbents that are operating in the band, so that you know when you buy a license in a particular county, whether that county is completely clear, or maybe there might be some military operations that impact your license. The Wireless Innovation Forum has worked on a document that has a lot of detail about encumbrances. I encourage you to look at that before you go to auction. Next slide, please. So do you have to buy a PAL to operate CBRS? And the short answer is no, not necessarily. So the way the rules are, there will be a minimum of 80 megahertz out of 150 megahertz in any given county that will be available for GAA. Now that's subject to incumbent operations. So if there's a satellite system there, or the DoD is operating there, you might get less than 80 megahertz, but the default is 80 megahertz of GAA spectrum, and that's the spectrum you don't have to pay for. And GAA, in addition to having 80 megahertz of minimum GAA in a given county, GAA may also use spectrum that a PAL has bought if they're not using it in a particular area of the county. So if a PAL buys a county, but they're only using it in the northwest corner, the rest of the county is available for GAA use until and if the PAL comes online in those other parts of the county. So GAA can opportunistically use PAL spectrum. And as far as in-building goes, in-building GAA from a coexistence perspective with other GAA sharing the same spectrum is really has a little bit of natural immunity, because the building loss, the amount of signal being lost going out of the building or coming into the building from outside systems, will help attenuate interference between indoor and outdoor systems. So if you're operating purely indoors, GAA may be perfectly fine for you, and you may not have to buy a PAL. On the other hand, PAL offers greater quality of service, because you get interference protections managed by the spectrum access system, and you get better spectrum availability assurance than you do in the GAA tier. Also, keep in mind, you can use both PAL and GAA. If you buy PAL spectrum in a county, that does not preclude you from using GAA in the same county. So you can combine bandwidth from both. Next slide, please. So equipment is available now. I just counted up this morning. There are currently over 48 models of indoor and outdoor CBRS base stations that have achieved FCC certification. There's also over 70 end user devices and modules available, including iPhone, LG phones, the Google Pixel 3 and 4 phones, Samsung handsets. They're all available now. And you can see the CBRS Alliance website certification page if you'd like to see a partial list of what's available. Next slide, please. And this is the last one. I said this would be a very high level overview, and it is.
Yeah, we took that slide out, Andy.
Okay, very good.
We didn't want the competitors to Google listed here, so.
Yeah, okay, very good. So we're good. There, there's 5 spectrum access system administrators online now. The last one was just authorized by the FCC yesterday. So we're ready to go, and we're already providing. Google SAS is already providing a GAA service to a large number of customers. So thank you very much, Rich.
Andy, thank you for doing this. So, Brendan, I'm going to jump to you. First of all, I'd like to thank your company, ANS, for being a sponsor of this panel. Thank you very much. And also the other members of this panel, also sponsors of the event. But for you, Brendan, I'd like to you're the guy, I think, along with JMA, who's on this panel, that has experience from the standpoint of having done a major CBRS deployment. Can you work us through that, talk a little bit about what's done and your experience with using this?
Absolutely, Rich. And I'd like to first lead with thanking you and the team at Connected with putting this event together. It's exciting to be doing this and adapting and overcoming as much as we can in these challenging times. Thank you to the team. And so stepping through the project at American Dream, the entertainment retail complex in East Rutherford, New Jersey, we deployed in partnership with JMA as well as Geoverse, a private LTE network for the outdoor spaces day one, and then there's plans to expand from there, but we're covering the majority of the 600-acre campus with private LTE. And the initial use case there was to connect digital signage, and it was a very powerful message for them because it's an existing brownfield development, existing parking lots, roads, et cetera. To get fiber to where the digital signage was going to be for vehicle management, you would have had to do a lot of trenching, a lot of restoration. They were estimating it was going to take around 14 months and between $4 and $7 million to get done. We were able to do it in a fraction of that time for a fraction of that cost. And after that initial use case of let's connect the digital signage, everybody's mind started turning and thinking about other ways we could utilize this network. And there was a lot of excitement from the team, because it's not a replacement for Wi-Fi. It's not a replacement for fiber. It's another tool in your network connectivity toolbox, and gives you flexibility to deploy new solutions or existing solutions in new locations that otherwise would have been too challenging or too costly to have make sense. And it allows the building owner and building manager to be its own LTE wireless network provider. Previous to this, private LTE in North America has been the domain of the wireless carriers, and this really democratizes LTE and allows your building owners and managers to deploy it where they need it and how they need it to solve the problems that they can't solve with fiber and Wi-Fi.
So let's just roll back a second. This is a complex that's part of the entire complex of what's called Giant Stadium in the Meadowlands in New Jersey. So on a Sunday afternoon, when there's a football game and the football game lets out, there could still be people theoretically in this, and they hate it when I call it a mall. I'm not allowed to call it a mall.
No,
it's an entertainment complex. So in the entertainment complex, when 60,000 people are trying to leave the football game and there's still people in the mall, the signage will guide people to go in a way that they can actually get out of there instead of sitting in traffic with the rest of the Giant fans or whomever that are leaving the stadium. So this was really an important piece of the puzzle in getting that built, right?
Absolutely. And on top of that, to make it more intelligent and more, so the vehicle management system, it's dynamic. The messages and the signage that's displayed on these 31 odd, actually now 33 signage locations can be dynamic and changed if, say, the east entrance is all jammed up because somebody took the corner too tight. They can route people to the west exit. Gotcha. And also, if it goes beyond just that on the complex, because you're now interacting with Route 120 on one side and the
Turnpike.
Oh, yeah, the Jersey Turnpike there on the other side. So you need to take a lot of traffic data, and what's currently being knitted into the solution now are more traffic analytics, whether it's through cameras and LiDAR for vehicle counting, for vehicle speed tracking, to say, okay, instead of just having one person looking at all these different cameras that are covering it or waiting for a security person to use their two-way to reach out, they can actively say, oh, we noticed a slowdown at location A. Let's automatically push a change to the signage to route that traffic. So there's a lot of just process value you get there from streamlining the ingress and egress from that campus, the entertainment retail campus, Rich.
Not the mall. So Todd, what were the equipment challenges? JMA was part of this from the get-go. What were the equipment challenges? How did you resolve those? And sort of how do you see this chart, that if you could talk us through this chart that you did, which is a terrific chart. Talk us through that and how you overcame the challenges at this non-mall.
Yeah, well, this wonderful modern day entertainment complex is going to draw a lot of people to it, and of course, people that come there have to make their way around efficiently and park. And look, when they came to us and asked, hey, is there another way we can solve this problem with this new wireless technology? It was a great opportunity to apply it. And I think what's happening with ANS and with the team at American Dream is happening all over the marketplace, which is part of what I'll talk about on this diagram on your screen here. We're realizing now that we've opened up this new highway of spectrum that can be used by the private sector, as Brendan is saying, that I now start to think through all the different use cases. And I can tell you that across numerous industries, as Andy was listing some of the areas, we're working directly with all kinds of different industries. And what you're finding is that there's self-discovery going on, right? There's people saying, well, wait a minute, I have this problem because to one of the watchers' questions, my Wi-Fi spectrum doesn't propagate in a way around my complex facility. Will this solve that problem? And the benefit is, with this technology, you can create an independent, very pervasive level of coverage across your facility. When you look at this map, I think one of the things that's important for people to understand when they're looking at it for their buildings is that they want to set themselves up to maximize the utilization of as much of this available spectrum as possible. If it's GAA and 80 megahertz, that's quite a bit of spectrum for you to utilize in your facility. And inside buildings, with much of your audience here, they're going to have a lot more than that available inside those buildings. Now, what you see in this chart is really understanding on one side of it, different kinds of use cases. So in our industry of mobility, we love to think about mobile phones, right? But the reality is most of the early use cases are not mobile phones. They're actually building control devices. In the industrial sector, they're becoming mobile cobots and automatic guided vehicles. This shows something a little bit more aligned with kind of a building infrastructure. Most of the buildings you guys have different types of tenancies in them. So you might have retail in the base, you might have residential, you might have business entities. Well, you can now arm your building with assets that are CBRS channels that you can allocate and even monetize for use cases across your tenancies. The last thing I want everybody to understand about this chart is it's really important for your CBRS system to, I'll say, be a smart CBRS RAN system. What does that really mean? The ability to carve up the spectrum and then map it into different uses on the IP or the local area networking side, because you'll find your IT organization has separate VLANs for one thing, or maybe you want to connect to different tenancies, different edge applications, out to hypercloud applications, or what you're going to see happen is mobile roaming, and these buildings will become visited networks, and we'll get a great deal of efficiency with mobile phone connectivity inside of buildings.
Gotcha. So I want to move on to Bob from Ericsson. And Bob, Ericsson's sort of taken a little bit of a different approach to this, and you've got something called a network in a box, and you're doing some really interesting things in terms of being able to provide multiple different parts of the environment for people. Can you talk about what you're doing with this and how it's working?
Right. So thanks. We kind of have I'd say a similar view as JMA here. I think is an excellent portrayal of the use cases. When we use a term like network in a box, I mean, that also implies that you have sort of, in this chart, sort of a hidden layer of sophistication, because this is a mobile network solution. And I think what has happened over the last couple of years is there's been so much innovation in the 4G and now, to come 5G evolution, that a lot of the network elements that, used to be extremely, expensive and tailored to big mobile network operators have now shrunk down to, a size and space and capability set that's, highly virtualized and, really is at cost and price points that we'd never seen before and weren't possible before, quite honestly. So, in like a 4 to 6U small rack unit, you can get an entire network capability set that will drive, thousands of users, or if not tens of thousands of users. Other vendors, also like us, offer, a wide variety of solutions. One thing that we tend to focus on is kind of the collaborative capability set between a standalone system that you might have, let's say, at an American Dream. Then you have sort of the neutral host capability set, which is a little more sophisticated, where you have interworking with network operators. And then you have mobile network operators that may want to deploy their own solution into the premise and offer, networking capabilities and services. And I think a lot of this is being driven by a term we use of private networks, built off of this spectrum and the platform capabilities. And so we do, since we do a lot of work with big mobile network operators, they certainly want to come in and service this market. But the new emerging, players like Geoverse that are bringing in neutral host and private network capabilities are really exciting, new space for us to work with these partners and potential, providers to the real estate industry.
Gotcha. So Ronald, I want to get to you too. Sort of your firm is taking an approach that involves the core of the network too, not just the sort of the end units or the radios and that, but you've got sort of an end-to-end solution. How is that working, and how do you see the environment, sort of morphing into the future as we find more and more and more solutions?
Oh, thank you, Rich. Yes, we do provide end-to-end solutions, including the core. Core, when you are building a wireless network, as many operators know, the core is a major investment. A lot of the customers that we are serving do not have the luxury for a full-blown core on their as part of their solution. So we provide this cloud core to allow them to get a quick start. And in the U.S., we have helped more than 500 customers to do that in a both indoor and outdoor environment. In terms of indoor private LTE, we were seeing the same trend. We have been very successful in building the private LTE networks in other part of the world, but in the US, with the availability of the CBRS spectrum, that a lot of the indoor venue owners and operators are getting excited. And we will introduce this core, the cloud core concept to this as part of our solution as well.
Right. So what is the core? If I'm a real estate owner, and I'm sure most of our viewers are out there, if I'm a commercial real estate owner, what does the core do for me? What does it give me? It gives me things like making sure the person who's trying to sign in is eligible. What does it do for me in that sense as a core?
Oh, core is as compared to, as opposed to the RAN, or the radio access network, which provide the radios and the RF propagations to provide the connections to the end user. But the core is the brain behind the RANs to process this data and backhaul this data to the backbone. And it's an essential part of the LTE solution, which CBRS is based on.
Okay. So I'd like to go back to Brendan. I'm sorry, I'd like to go back to Andy. There was a question up, and I don't know why they took it down, but the question was, is the 6 gigahertz auction going to reduce the importance or the value of what we're doing here with CBRS?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've been on panels where we're comparing and contrasting 6 gigahertz to CBRS. So they're really not competing bands. They are complementary. For those who aren't necessarily aware, tomorrow we expect the FCC to vote on approving 1200 megahertz of spectrum in the 6 gigahertz band to be able to be used by unlicensed wireless devices, either standard power devices that are allowed up to 4 watts of power, which is similar to what's running today in Wi-Fi, or lower power devices that have to be used indoors only. Wi-Fi and CBRS are really kind of two different things. For the first thing, the power that you're allowed to run in the CBRS is considerably more than what you're allowed to run in Wi-Fi. So for example, the category Bs in CBRS can run up to 50 watts of power compared to the 4 watts that Wi-Fi can run. So CBRS can run, if needed, up to more than 10 times the power of Wi-Fi. And so for coverage and for outdoor broadband networks and things like that, there really is no comparison in terms of the coverage of CBRS and Wi-Fi. The other thing is that the way CBRS has evolved is it's very heavily at the moment 3GPP focused in terms of supporting 4G LTE and 5G NR. And it's used as, for example, data offload from macro networks and things like that. And so it enables seamless roaming, assuming you have roaming agreements, but it allows seamless roaming from a private LTE network onto a carrier's network, or to be used as a carrier network for fill-in or for in-building coverage and things. And so it's completely seamless roaming. It just appears as part of the default LTE or 5G NR network.
Gotcha.
6 gigahertz propagation is also different. You have higher losses in and out of buildings at 6 gigahertz than you do in the CBRS band. Now, having said that, if you want extremely high bandwidth and extremely high data rates, right now the 6 gigahertz band will support up to 160 megahertz bandwidth of Wi-Fi 6E, which will give you incredible data rates. So if you're looking for just amazing throughput over fairly short ranges, like in a room or something like that, then Wi-Fi is what you want. So the two technologies are really complementary to each other.
So Todd, I'd like you to talk us through, and I'm not clear on this myself, I'd like you to talk us through how CBRS will help us as real estate owners work through the challenges of getting to 5G. That the CBRS can be the gateway to help us get 5G into buildings. Can you talk me through how that process works?
Sure. Yeah, and for the audience, 5G, and sometimes I say is in the eye of the beholder because it means so many different things to many people. But let's talk about it in the context of why would you start with something like CBRS now, and then how does that take you to 5G? What are the pros, cons, and then what else beyond CBRS? So, firstly, with CBRS is spectrum, right? And we have a methodology for you to get access and put that spectrum in a building. Today, all of the standards and the approach and the solutions out there are based on an LTE technology. The CBRS Alliance, who guides the process in collaboration with the FCC and others of the next steps of CBRS, has already announced the next framework for evolving CBRS technology to 5G technology. So what's important for you to understand is the investments you're making in a building should have a checkbox on them that says, I can go from LTE CBRS to 5G CBRS by simply making a configuration or a software change. If there's a lot of hardware changes throughout your infrastructure, you should proceed with caution. That is absolutely doable in today's technology, number one. Now, that's CBRS 5G. 5G also goes down into low bands, right? You see mobile operators offering 5G in the 600 megahertz spectrum. You see 5G being offered by mobile operators in the millimeter wave spectrum. typically inside of your buildings, the lower bands are not what we would normally deploy as coverage and capacity in the world of cellular. We typically are going to use the mid bands, commonly known in operators as AWS PCS. Why? Because they stay within the building nicely. They don't actually penetrate through your leads glass that you have around your wonderful buildings. That's a good thing for cellular because it creates nice isolation and it creates easy handoffs from the outside to the inside of the building. The last thing about 5G is millimeter wave. Today, a lot of the deployments of millimeter wave are in outdoor areas. You're going to see new technologies that are designed for in-building type environments. They give you a great deal of coverage inside your in-building environments out of a small cell-like platform and give you the advantage of millimeter wave technology as well as 5G and in the mid-bands.
Gotcha. So Bob, I'd like to go to you next. I'm not trying to throw you a curve, but I think this is an important point to make. Handsets. What's available out there now? And Andy talked a little bit about that, but talk about the theory of, don't we need to go through an entire changeover of handsets in order to have everybody coming into my building potentially with a CBRS capable handset before I could actually really maximize my use of CBRS? Or is it perfectly okay that some people will have it and some people will not?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not going to be okay if you don't have the right spectrum band, allocated in your phone. But I think the industry has been working towards this day, for some time, a couple of years almost. So as we, highlighted in the beginning, the handset ecosystem is coming along pretty nicely. And yeah, I mean, you're going to have a new, an up-to-date device. You may already have CBRS on your phone and don't even know it. So I think, that's when you're talking about just bringing the general consumer devices into the, into the real estate environment, the campus or, building environment. And that's really needed for the cases where you want to provide, in-building service as part of the, let's say, general consumer enterprise mobility capabilities that are out there. There's another opportunity that's sitting out there that is yet to be tapped, which is bringing devices into the enterprise for things like push-to-talk service, for example, where you'd want to maybe modernize from some old, land mobile radio or other proprietary solutions, and introduce, as a part of your CBRS networking environment, push-to-talk, or even we're involved in projects we call mission-critical push-to-talk, where you're talking about public safety and security. And this is a new opportunity, a new emerging area for real estate owners, for campus owners, where you can provide a private networking service that not only has the core network, as we described earlier, it could also have push-to-talk and communication services built right in that are totally private and managed by the enterprise or campus itself. So this is a really interesting opportunity. We're seeing this, for example, at airports, at port authorities, other places where you have sort of mission critical or business critical operations that require, high performance and highly reliable communications infrastructure. It's a great new opportunity to offer that kind of service as an add-on to what you're doing through normal communication services. So yeah, the devices matter. The module ecosystem's coming along as well. So you have data modules and gateways. There's quite a few gateway vendors out there that provide gateways that'll go between Wi-Fi and CBRS or LTE, or so that ecosystem is quite robust. And it's I think Andy mentioned you got to check every day because there's new devices becoming available almost every day.
Yep. So Brendan, taking that, what Bob was saying about the flexibility that CBRS gives you, it was a question that somebody asked. Is using that flexibility idea, is the American dream looking at roaming voice services, the ability for the vendors inside the mall, the kiosks, to use CBRS to run charge cards, to do voice, push to talk? What's the thinking at the entertainment complex, and what's the future for um, other operators to use this in a flexible sort of way?
Absolutely. And I think kind of touching on, you really hit a lot of pieces there, Rich, in terms of what they can do today for monetizing that network with providing connectivity. So we're a lot of the endpoint connectivity at American Dream right now is running with, we have Cradle Point endpoints out there, and that gives us a lot of flexibility on what we can enable over that network. Because just because you want to put somebody with a kiosk or a pop-up store on your private LTE network to enable them to run their charge cards, them to have their data network and be your own network operator within your four walls or within your campus, you still want to be able to have the network security and be able to control what people are doing on your network and how they're doing it. So you really need the LTE security, which secures your air interface, but what people do at those endpoints when you start acting as a network provider in your own network or to the tenants within your facility, that's where you need to have the control and have the right endpoint security in place as well. And that's another way to monetize it, is to be a network provider within your walls, within those pop-up signs and your signage locations when you're doing any sort of out-of-home billboard type of advertising. If you know that traffic patterns are changing within your facility and you want to increase the number of impressions that your digital advertising has, you can move those signs and be as dynamic as you can to increase the number of impressions and maximize the return on your digital advertising inside your facility. So there's a lot you can do with it, and that spans more than just entertainment retail complexes. A lot of major real estate has the ability to advertise to the traffic that's either passing through their facilities, through their lobbies, coming to be visitors within their buildings to see their tenants. So there's a lot of different ways to approach the monetization and go across it. And I think long term, Bob said it well, the world is seeded with these devices right now, and also the frequencies that cover band 48 in the States have been utilized in other footprints for quite some time. So I think the opportunity for roaming and is definitely out there. You need to have the right ecosystem of partners and platforms in place to offer the agreements and relationships with those carriers, because just because you have an LTE network doesn't mean that a carrier is just going to say, oh, we'll throw all your traffic over it, because that they're concerned about their namesake.
Yeah. So Ronald, that leads a perfect lead into you. You've got more of the international experience. So two-part question for you. If CBRS is a US-based network that the Navy had the allocation, we created this network around the fact that the Navy had priority. What's going on internationally? We're not using quote unquote CBRS internationally. What are we doing, and how could there be roaming internationally? Is it just because it's the same frequency, or is it a similar network on a different set of frequencies? Two parts.
Okay, first question is about the how to apply this technology to international market. Well, the fundamental technology for CBRS is LTE, which is a pretty standardized international technologies. So this fundamental technologies allows this, whatever we have done in the international market, to be applied into US and vice versa. I think that might be the first part of the question. The second part of the question is how these two different networks interwork with each other. This is for the same reason, because this is the standardized technologies, the roamings, like gentleman has mentioned earlier, and the interworking is pretty easy, pretty standardized, and easy to apply.
Is it just that, or will we be using the 3.5 band internationally and roam on, or would it still have to have a SAS and it still have to have all the other things that we use here in the States?
well, so far, SAS, this concept of shared spectrum is only available in the U.S., right? But this is a technology. The shared spectrum can be borrowed by international markets as well. We'll see.
So
Gotcha.
one thing to add on to that, because I think it's a good topic from a national, the CBRS approach of accessing the spectrum is a U.S. phenomenon. And you get a grant for use of a chunk of spectrum through an online system called the SAS. Utilizing spectrum outside of the U.S. for private wireless networks has been done for a while, and organizations overseeing that, like Ofcom out of the UK, have access to spectrum available today. It's a slightly different mechanism. It's not the same as having a SAS like CBRS, but particularly European countries have a very progressive approach right now, and there's several private wireless scenarios coming up. To your question on spectrum, it is slightly different, right? There are different chunks of bands there that are being used for this. There's a mid-band spectrum. We usually know it as band 42, band 43. It's wider than CBRS. And it'll offer some 5G NR stuff in its initial projects that we're working on.
Gotcha. So there was a question asked, there's localized spectrum available in many different markets, 3.7 in Germany, 2.3 and 3.8 in the UK, various bands in Japan, et cetera. So when Ronald was talking about this roaming concept internationally, it could be on different bands, but it's going to be a universal LTE sort of frequency or LTE sort of setup using different frequencies around the world. Does that sort of cover it?
So to everybody that's traveled internationally has experienced the roaming function. So really simply how it works is your mobile phone gets turned on in a new country where your operator doesn't exist. Well, let's call it your home network. And it talks to local network operators, and it finds one that essentially says, hey, I can talk to your home network. So there's a service in the middle called the IPX roaming networks, run by several different players. And it can essentially request authentication to your home network to authenticate you to connect to the visited network. Okay, and once that authentication happens, then you connect as if you're on your own home network. Now, if you take that topology that, as Ron mentioned, is fairly standardized today, and you think of a building like ANS's American Dream Mall as a visited network, in theory, there's technically no reason you couldn't walk in there, and essentially the CBRS Energy says, hey, I can be your visited network for you, authenticate you on your home network operator, and give you CBRS as a service as a roamed phone in that visited network.
I'm sorry, Todd, I have to cut you off there because you used the word mall. I'm terribly sorry. You're not allowed to refer to it as a mall. So,
modern day entertainment complex.
There you go. So let's go around the horn real quick with the few minutes we have left. I want to talk about monetization. We did a webinar not too long ago. Andy was kind enough to be on that. We had a fellow from MGM Grand in Vegas named Jay Floyd. And Jay was talking about how, from a casino operator standpoint, they were looking at monetizing this. In the meantime, I've had some conversations with companies about the advertising piece. So Brendan was talking about taking that signage that wasn't being used to direct traffic potentially and saying, hey, buy Nikes here in this entertainment complex, or, come to this restaurant that's here in the entertainment complex. So can we go around the horn really quick if there are any examples or any thoughts you have on the monetization piece? And so let's start with Bob. If there's anything that you've seen or been privy to from the monetization side of this, can we talk a little bit about that so that we cover our mandate with this panel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll do it real quick. A couple of things. Certainly, I can confirm the potential in dealing with things like next generation kiosks. We're doing a project with the Dallas Area Rapid Transit and a company called Landmark Dividend Lord Landmark owns the actual kiosk footprint, and it's a mini piece of real estate that they put a kiosk on, which is the building. And it's outfitted with, very large digital signage, dynamic, just like American Dreams. And it's also being outfitted with CBRS networking capability to provide that access to and from the kiosk, and provide other things like backhaul for local access. I mentioned earlier, being able to offer premium services like private networks and dedicated networking capability, even mission critical communication services, is something that's a very high value service if your tenants require such a thing. Also, we've seen cases, I think it was alluded to, but being able to set up, let's say, video monitored parking, where video as a sensor to monitor a parking lot can provide a parking solution. There's many application providers out there that can provide that as a new service to monetize parking in a smarter way. I'll let the other panelists talk about some of the other cases. There's a lot of cases.
Yep. Brendan, you've got something up your sleeve, I bet, that we haven't heard about yet. Can you share with us in terms of a monetization example?
Okay. Well, I touched a little bit on, so I would say really the being a network operator within your own four walls is a huge opportunity that this enables. It's another source of stream of revenue to get from your tenants that are already in your building, and a lot of times have a need for connectivity that may not be serviced by the folks that are already in the riser closets. So it's another option there.
Got it. Ronald, anything you're seeing internationally maybe that makes sense in terms of what might come to the U.S. in terms of being able to monetize?
Yes, we have done things to monetize, to allow our customers to monetize the equipment we make with a lot of 5G's concept in our design already. For example, we believe the CBRS installations can serve multiple purposes. You can slice it, which is 5G technology, to slicing it into different applications for different purposes and serve different customers. That will give you many ways to monetize it. And the other thing is that we're already looking forward to 5G. So we want our equipment is designed in such a way, for example, the Open RAN architecture that allows you to evolve the radio and the distributed unit or baseband components to independently for 5G as well. So all those things can help customer both protect their investment and also find new applications to make money.
So Todd, I got to give a shout out, and John Gilbert did this morning for JMA's efforts to make ventilators to help people who have the virus, and that is admirable, and I hope that's going well from your standpoint. Thank you for that. But any ideas, anything else that you're seeing from the standpoint of monetization, people asking you for things that are monetizable, if you will?
Sure. And thanks for the shout out. Obviously, leveraging our innovation and engineers to do our part here during this time. So, maybe kind of wrapping up, because there's, as Bob started out, there are so many cases I could spend time going through. But here's how I would encourage your audience to think about this. There can be monetization on the positive side of the line, meaning I put in CBRS capabilities, and as Ron said, I have the ability to slice that up in my building and enable certain services for my tenancies and maybe get funds from that, all right? So a positive income perspective. And then you got to think about it below the line, right? Where Brendan started out in this conversation was a situation where time to get a fabulous venue open, that's not a mall, was important, and time is money. Well, the other factor that he highlighted is the significance of savings of using this technology versus burrowing up concrete and stuff and trying to run fiber. Don't over design it, do what's necessary with this technology. So, I would say there's a lot of monetization that's coming in the form of significantly more efficient businesses, buildings, operations of those facilities, that is changing your bottom line. And then there's the top line. So always be thinking about the different use cases. And don't just think about mobile phones. Think about all the potential mobilization of IT functions.
Got it. So Andy, I'm going to give you the last word on this. You were on our webinar. You weren't talking about ideas about monetization specifically, but maybe you could sort of refresh us on what Jay Floyd talked about from what they're looking at from a monetization standpoint. Do you recollect what he discussed, and can we talk those through in terms of how it looks from the standpoint of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so, we are a SaaS administrator. So, we operate the cloud portion that enables all of this to work and to do the interference management. I think Jay was looking at, to him, it was the private LTE network aspect of this, especially in a high security environment like a casino and things, but also matching that with the opportunity for seamless roaming with carriers and other things in and out of the building and in the surrounding building area. So, they're looking at, what the value to them of operating a highly secure private network and their ability to meld that network with external carriers and into the broader macro ecosystem. That was one of his main drivers of the value proposition of CBRS. So we absolutely agree with that. As a SaaS administrator, I see monetization going on with our customers. I'm not free to discuss what our customers are doing without their permission, but there's a lot of very innovative uses. And monetization doesn't necessarily mean how you make cash directly off the CBRS network, but how you're saving money by accessing basically prime mid-band spectrum potentially for free to operate, things that control your factory floor or your mine or things that operate in your sports entertainment or entertainment venues. And you're not having to pay, unless you go to the PAL tier, you're not having to pay a cent for that, for the spectrum itself, is actually a big value kind of thing for a lot of our customers. And let me say, although it's not an indoor application, as a SaaS administrators, one of the big applications we're seeing so far is outdoor fixed broadband access. So particularly among legacy broadband providers migrating to CBRS, we're seeing a tremendous uptake in fixed broadband operations, both in rural areas, but also even in suburban and urban areas as a potential last 100-meter type of connectivity.
As I recall, Jay might have talked about the ability in the casino when someone walks in with a CBRS-enabled phone, that there is an opportunity potentially to say to them, why not visit our restaurant? And
Yep.
To be able to push data to the clients that are in the venue, and monetize in terms of the advertising piece, the customer service function, and all of those sorts of things, which
Yep.
It got a tremendous rise out of the audience from our webinar. And I think
Yep.
that's where the CBRS monetization piece goes for me is, in Brendan's situation with American Dream and JMA's, can those signs now be used for advertising for a fee? Can those things be used for other things? Can they make money off of, getting the tenants to buy the CBRS service from them inside the whatever the hell we're going to call it today, not a mall. But I think we're just about out of time, everybody. I want to again thank A&S for sponsoring this panel. I want to thank all of you for attending. Please, everyone who's listening and watching, please visit the exhibit booths. We've had nearly 2,500 exhibit booth visits so far at the event, Aaron tells me. And I look forward to many more tomorrow, our second day of the event. Again, thank you all for being there. It's so meaningful for us to be the first one out of the chute with this virtual event, and for it to have been so wonderful. And you guys were all really great today on this panel. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you tomorrow for day 2.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Rich. Have a good one.
Thank you, Rich.
Anand?